Hi everyone, this is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to approach someone who's experiencing estrangement. Because in our last video, we talked about some of the misconceptions and misunderstandings that were faced, all of us within the sibling estrangement community, of course, coming from others who don't understand our experience. And in this episode, we'll be talking about how to approach us in such a way as to inquire about our experience in a respectful and dignified way. And in turn, this will help you to better see when sibling estrangement happens and what that can feel like for some of us if you're coming from outside of our community, right? Because a lot of times people wonder, like, what is sibling estrangement? What does it feel like and such? So, one of the first things I want to mention, of course, is to recognize that this is a painful process for that person going through it. It's not based on stubbornness or ghosting, and it's a process usually that starts off, that builds onto itself and is ongoing, usually for several years. And it can be, of course, a painful subject for us to open up and talk about. So today I'm here with author Fern Schumer Chapman, and I'm so happy to get a chance to talk with you again, Fern, because this is a topic that's been on our minds for a while too.
Right. There's discomfort on both sides. It's not just that a friend may not know how to broach the topic. It's also that the person who's estranged can be very reluctant to share what they feel. And I can tell you from my own experience when I was estranged from my brother, people who knew both of us would say, "How is your brother doing?" And I was so uncomfortable talking about it that I would simply turn that around quickly and say, "Oh, fine. How's your brother?" And that was my dodge. And I think it speaks to the problem that we're about to tackle today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in some ways it's not something that we're necessarily comfortable to bring up because it brings up a lot of emotions. But for somebody coming outside of it and wanting to understand us better, there are some points to consider, right? And I'm glad that we're going to get into that today. So maybe we can get into one of these first points. I think that one of the things we need to mention is the idea that it's okay to talk about a difficult subject, right? And to ask about it and such. So we'll open up, of course, and feel safe with you, provided that we're validated in our feelings, of course. And when that happens, then we can share more, right? And I think that when people have questions that resemble more like misplaced curiosity, that's when that causes us to shut down.
Right. I think you want to talk to somebody who you feel close to, who you feel can receive the information and give you some support and comfort. And if you're in that role, it's important to respect the reason that somebody has chosen this path. It's not an easy path. And so that person probably has very legitimate reasons. And even if you don't entirely understand or agree with the actions, you have to trust that your friend knows what's best for them.
Exactly, exactly. So that notion of trust, that notion that things have happened for a reason, right? And that somehow, of course, this is a process that builds, like we were saying
Mhm.
earlier. So definitely, I think when people understand that and approach it in such a way that this has been, of course, a difficult process, then that's really, really important. And
Mhm.
another point, of course, is to accept that what we say was our emotional experience, right? And I've seen this before in some places where people will ask whether it was true or not, and just questioning in some ways some of the validity that what we go through. And of course, this is very real for us, right? And I think that what happens with some people is that there can be a narrative that comes up that differs from what you may know about a particular family, right? And to somehow, of course, experience that in such a way that you get another type of reality that comes in and paints a completely different picture, I think is really important when it comes to, of course, identifying that people can have these differing emotional experiences.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that brings me to what's absolutely essential in this, and that is listening. Somebody has to be willing to hear what is the story. And even if they don't want to talk, offer an ear so that maybe at some point they will become comfortable sharing their experiences. And when they do tell you, what's happening and how hard it's been for them. I think sentences like "that sounds so hard," or "I'm sorry that you're going through this," or "you're hurting and I'm happy to listen." Those sorts of things go a long way.
I absolutely agree. I think that's really, really important when you feel that sense of support and, like you said, active listening and acknowledgement, right? So,
Mhm.
so important, you know. And at the same time, I think it's important for people to understand as well that it's not all of us that feel comfortable being an open book, right? And some of us may want to give a few pieces at a time because it's a difficult process for us to talk about. And I think that it's good to respect people's rhythm when it comes to what they want to disclose, right? So that's just something to keep in mind, of course, with respect to sibling estrangement.
Yeah, I think that a lot of us feel so alone in the experience, and we have no idea how somebody else is going to respond to the news that we haven't spoken to our brother in decades. And the other piece of this that's important is that I think those of us who are estranged worry that we're going to be pushed into doing something we don't want to do. So, for example, I would say to the listener, try not to judge or force a reconciliation or in some way apply your own reality onto them. And if anything, maybe you want to ask how they feel about a situation, let them talk, and maybe even encourage them to speak to a professional.
Yeah, yeah, that makes perfect sense, And I think that really, really highlights, one of my next points, which is don't assume that you can fix the problem with a ready-made
Yeah.
solution, right? I think that estrangement's been a compounding effect for a great many of us, as a matter of fact, and some of us, of course, go through therapy, support groups, and we get other resources to empower ourselves, of course. So we do have ways to work on this. And I think that with somebody coming from outside of it, trying to understand it, is simply don't seek to try to fix it. Try to see it from that person's perspective. It's not an easy process to go through, and it can take time for people to unlearn society's expectations when it comes to what we perceive as being family.
And I always say this to you, probably every episode, and that is that there are some relationships that are too violent and too hurtful to engage in. And people have all sorts of reasons, some of which they don't want to talk about,
Yeah.
that including sexual abuse or financial abuse, and they're not going to lay it on the line for you. I think the more important way to go about this is to remind your friend that they're loved and that you know that they're going through a tough time and that there is a chosen family for them and you're part of that.
Exactly. And I think that's really, really important, right? Of course, to expand, right? And to notice that there's other roles that we can have in terms of relationships we can have with other people that can foster meaning for us. And I think that that's a very good point you're making because I think that at the same time, it's important that people see us, as being like themselves. We are just like you. We're caring people, and we sometimes we do want to know more about you as well. And even though estrangement can play a big part in our lives, we have other interests as well, right? Asking, for example, how we create meaning outside of our lives, our sibling estrangement lives, is a great way to get to know ourselves and such. And oftentimes I say to people, that inquire about this, we have more in common with you than you think.
Right. I think there's a tendency on for people who are in intact relationships to rush to judgment.
Mhm.
And what your estranged friend wants to hear is that your opinion of them hasn't changed simply because they have cut off from a brother or sister. And that would be really reassuring. And honestly, personally, I never heard that.
That's very true. The idea that you're reaffirming that relationship and that tie that you have with someone, right? It's so, so important, of course, because we do become more aware of these of rejection or of relationships we have with other people precisely because we've been through hardship ourselves. and such. So absolutely, what you said there is very affirming. It's very, very important to hear, and it's very empowering and reassuring. So I think that's a great ending point, for today's session. When it comes to this particular topic about remembering that particular point.
Yeah, I always think to myself, Ollie John, that if I told you that I couldn't get along with my mother, you'd probably roll your eyes in agreement. If I told you I was divorced, you'd probably not even blink. But if I tell you that I can't get along with my brother, it raises all sorts of fundamental questions about who I am and whether I'm worthy of companionship. And
Yeah.
so I think that's kind of the underlying point of all this, that none of us want to feel that kind of judgment.
Absolutely. And I hope that today's episode was helpful for people, of course, needing that affirmation within our community, but also people outside our community that are asking about this, wanting to know how they can broach the subject and approach us, of course. It's very, very important that, of course, we are, of course, respected in this whole process, you know, of acknowledgement and such, of this difficult situation, we all have to walk through. So, Fern, let's talk about resources. What would be your number one resource right now when it comes to helping people in our community?
Well, I've actually had kind of an interesting development, which is I do one-on-one coaching, and I've been approached by several people lately who don't have horrifically estranged relationships to be a mediator to address some of the issues between them. And that's been an interesting opportunity. So that would be my resource, either the coaching or mediation to resolve some of the difficult feelings between siblings.
Absolutely. It's very important, of course, to be able to do that and, of course, create situations or create opportunities, I should say, rather, to be able to go further, I think, when it comes to some of these situations we go through. My number one resource at this point is, of course, the Sibling Estrangement Support Group. It's something that I host twice monthly. It's very, very important, of course, to have people come together in real time to empower themselves, break isolation and such, and be able to walk away with some empowering advice and such from me and others in the group, of course, that are respectful and able to hold each other's vulnerabilities. So, so important to do that. And of course, I do offer my sibling estrangement immersive workshop on improving my self-esteem following sibling estrangement. So it's very important that people can, of course, reach out and if they'd like to have some help that can go into some deeper, more in-depth materials to be able to help us navigate through that. That is certainly something I can help them with as a psychotherapist. So Ferd, this has been wonderful to be able to do this again with you. I think it's great that we are able to sit together and bring this up. I'm certain that this was very relevant to a great number of people in our community and outside, of course. And I very much look forward to our next video again.
I do too.
All right. Well, you take care, Fern.
Okay. Bye
Thanks.
now.
Bye-bye.